If you're constantly waiting for the hard things to be over, your life will pass you by and it'll be over before you know it. Like, life is challenging. And that's not negative. That's just part of the beautiful, complex thing that we have here. And, you know, like for me, I have, you know, chronic pain, injuries and whatnot. And, you know, if I was like, oh, okay, I'll enjoy life once they're gone, or I'll enjoy life when work's not so busy or this or that, you're just going to waste your whole life away.
In 1837, Horace Mann created the education system, a system at the time designed to pump out factory workers and professors. The same system that is still being used today in the 21st century. Now, Mann's system is backfiring. We are being moulded by the same industrial system that has existed for close to 200 years. That system delivers us into a digital economy that has no need of our outdated skills. This isn't our teachers' fault. This isn't the government's fault. This is due to a rapidly changing world full of technology and unforeseen circumstances. And us Gen Zs are caught in the middle. Welcome to the Driven Young podcast, the podcast for stressed, overwhelmed young Australians, teaching you practical life skills you can implement now to set yourself up in life. And now your host, Byron Dempsey.
Welcome back to the Driven Young podcast, and today I'm joined by the amazing Taylor Hawkins. Taylor is a passionate entrepreneur with a focus on social impact, innovation, and inclusion. Taylor is a founder and strategy director for Future Frontiers Group, a consultancy with a mission to support and grow purpose-led businesses, and serves as managing director of Foundations for Tomorrow. She's also the curator of the Sydney Global Shapers Hub, a director of the board of Global Shapers Community Australia, and FYA Young Social Pioneer Program alumni, and a climate reality leader. Point is, she does a lot of really cool stuff in this space. In this conversation, we talk about the importance of failing, what she did right after high school, how she fell in love with rejection, getting caught inside your own echo chamber, climate change and other problems young people are worried about, the education system and how it failed her even though she got the highest possible mark, and so much more. As per usual, feel free to DM myself or Taylor on Instagram. I'm speaking at schools now, so feel free to email me about coming to yours. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It only takes 2 minutes and it really helps me out. And everything else is in the top link in the show notes below. Now, over to Taylor. Taylor, welcome so much to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited to have a chat with you. We're really going to be talking about a lot of young people because that's who you work with and obviously who this podcast is targeted towards. So before we get into that, did you just want to share with me your story? Specifically, what did you do after high school and what are you currently up to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrapped high school and I was convinced I would be a human rights lawyer. I was very specific about it. I had a very clear visual in my head. And I started my law degree. I think I got halfway through it and I ended up as the foreman in a jury in the Supreme Court for a murder trial, which I was 19 at the time, which is an absolute joke that I ended up being the foreman. But I think I just got to see the inner workings of the legal system and realized that for someone like me who is quite frenetic, I love people, I love... I love creativity and sort of room for innovation, and the legal system really wasn't going to give that to me.
It's very rigid.
Very, very rigid. And I think it just, every personality has its strengths and weaknesses. My strengths lie in that I see opportunity and space for creativity and, you know, I question everything. I am not great at routine and at strict parameters. I find them quite suffocating. And so I could see myself not being very happy in that context. But my parents care deeply about education. So I finished my degree, but while I did that, I started a business while I was in high school, which was using heart rate variability technology to gauge the wellness of employees, heart rate variability being different to heart rate because it can tell you if you are excited versus stressed versus sad versus calm. Learned a lot, made so many mistakes. I would say that business was a success because it gave me the foundations of understanding entrepreneurship, but not necessarily.
Well, that's what I say to people. Like, I have a lot of young people going, I want to start a business. And I know in the back of my head, they're probably going to fail, but it's like good. Yeah. I say to them, look, you should start that business. You're probably going to fail, but that's good because you're going to learn from that. And then maybe by the time you're 25, you start a successful one. And it's like, great.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, by financial measures, not a success. Like, it helped. I survived on it, but it wasn't thriving. And I remember I saw a stat when I was about 22 and it was the average entrepreneur fails, I think, like 3.5 times. I was like, great, one failure down.
Yeah.
Let's try another one. I've just got to get through enough failures that I learn enough. And in my scramble to try a lot of different things, which I did, I sort of ended up working directly with other founders because my skill set lie in a particular area. And so I was coaching them there. And then, it sort of does become, and I think this is an important thing to share, it's not entirely linear. And there's probably a good 2-year chunk where I was just doing a lot of yes and.
Yeah.
You're like, do you do this? Yes, I do. I can do that. Which then led me into having a bit of free time and a bit more stability. So I started doing volunteering. I got into the Global Shapers community, which is part of the World Economic Forum, volunteering for a bunch of charities, which then led me to realize how broken our economy is, being that we have these for-profit companies causing a lot of problems, and then these beautiful nonprofits and charities sometimes who don't work that efficiently trying to clean up the mess, and that's just a system that's never gonna work.
Well, that's where a mate of mine, and I would love to get into, is more social enterprises. So that's like a business for profit, but it's also for good.
Correct.
And it's kind of like it merges a non-profit and a normal business, and it's like, all right, well, let's run a normal business, but let's try have something beyond money, beyond profit, and we can use that money to do what it help achieve these goals or whatever, but they're still making profit. And so that's a really cool space. That's where I think most futures of business should be heading into.
Yeah.
If you're starting a business just for profit, it's not always the most fulfilling thing and the best thing you should be doing. You should be trying to solve a problem.
Yeah.
And make an impact, in my opinion at least.
I could not more violently agree with you. I think for purpose is the future of business, which is like, why do we have this chasm between the two?
Yeah.
So that's sort of leads me to where I am now, which is that in my sort of consulting capacity, I help businesses, be successful and make money, but do that while being kind to people and planet in the process. And then I also lead Foundations for Tomorrow, which as of today, we're finishing our national youth consultation on climate change, and we'll be releasing a report, which hopefully will help to get a bit more progress on that front. But yeah, so that's sort of where I'm at the moment. Businesses doing better for the world and young people having a voice in that process.
Amazing. And we'll get into that in more detail. But I do want to backtrack to, you mentioned you felt like you had to do a university degree because your parents believed in the education system and wanted you to do that. How did you find that? Do you use your law degree? Do you wish you didn't have that pressure on you? Like, what was that experience like?
So I think the fact that my parents wanted me to finish the law degree makes a lot of sense, because they worked so hard to get me into a position where that was an option for me. They worked hard to get out of their context, and so there was a sense of duty I feel that I had, and it has definitely served me, I would say. I think especially as a young female entrepreneur trying a lot of different things, the fact that I can say, I've got a law degree, there is a level of credibility in the current way society functions that comes with that. Do I use it? Not necessarily, although my partner does. If we call them frictions rather than arguments. He'll be like, Lawyer Taylor, go away. If I start being like, but then you said this, and yeah. So
getting very logical.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I kind of do the same with arguments. I'll think really logically, and it's No, it's interesting though, because law is one of the biggest ones I get. I have a lot of people reaching out saying, Byron, I'm doing a law degree. I know I don't want to use this, but my parents want me to keep going. I've had probably over 10 people personally reach out saying that exact scenario. And it breaks my heart, because it's like, they feel like I had a girl, she's so talented. She does these incredible artworks and she wants to sell, and she started selling them and stuff. And I'm like, you're doing a law degree, but then you're an artist. That's such a clash of energies and difference. And so it's very difficult to navigate, because it's like, well, often your parents want what's best for you, right? They're not getting you to do that because they want you to be disadvantaged or anything. They want what's best for you.
Yeah.
But then it's navigating, how do I do what I want to do versus is this what I want to do? I love the point you made, how you went into a law situation. What was it? You were
I was on the jury for a murder
murder
trial.
case. Yeah. And then that gave you an insight to what it's actually like.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. It's important we get an insight to what the world is like before we start going into that career. Because otherwise you don't want to do a degree and then go, oh my gosh, now I realize I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Do that beforehand.
And it comes back exactly to your point of yes, fail. Get amongst the actual environment that you're thinking of getting into and see if you like it. Don't spend 5 years gaining a degree and then work out if you want to be doing that. Because and the other thing is, I think that if you're inclined towards science and math, there's a lot of different paths that if you want to be, academically or career successful, you could go down. Whereas if you're good with what I was, which is words and people, you sort of do get funneled into that law path. There's not that many others that fit into that parental pleasing bracket on that front. And
more traditional pathways.
No, exactly. Yeah. And because I loved art as well, I spent that was probably my first love. A good friend of mine and I, we were just obsessed with ceramics, and we both did it for the HSC. And I think there's another world where I went and studied art and became a sculptor, because I would absolutely love that. But yeah, definitely society prescribes a little bit of what success looks like, and I think I definitely listened to that when I was younger.
And so you feel like if you were being your truest self, you may have gone down the art way?
Yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah, I think I would have I wanted to be a curator of an art gallery and sort of do my own art on the side, but knowing that you never really make too much money being an artist unless you're the 1%. It's like being a musician.
Yeah. Well, I actually just did an episode with an artist who's an artist full-time, and the whole episode was about how to basically turn your creativity passion into a paid gig, because there's no traditional pathways, right? The thing about being a doctor or a lawyer, it's it's difficult, but you know how to get there. Yeah. Go get a degree, do that degree, leverage that degree, get a job, etc., etc. But with an artist, it's do you get a degree? Do you need a degree? Do you build your connections? How do you start do you sell it online? Do you go on social media? Do you use TikTok and all these different aspects? And so he has a really cool story. He's been a full-time artist for 8 years now. And he loves it, and he does a lot of murals, and he does works with a lot of different brands and stuff. And so that was very interesting, because it is really unclear and a very difficult thing to do. And you might have parents or teachers who say, well, because there's no clear pathway, you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
But it's I'm a big fan of just following what you want to do. And that's where society and the whole world can start speaking in the back of our head, going, oh, should you do this? But is there enough money in it? Blah blah blah. I believe you can make money doing whatever you want nowadays, especially with social media.
Yeah.
Have you seen that Jim Carrey speech?
It is literally I know exactly what you're talking about. I know the 3 sentences you're referring to, which is that his father wanted to be a comedian and became an accountant instead, but then eventually lost his job. And it's, you can fail doing the thing you don't want to do, so you might as well fail doing the thing you do. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, that's
exactly it. Yeah. And he delivers it so well. He's you can fail at doing the thing you don't want to do, so you might as well try the thing you do want to do.
100%.
My father could have been a great comedian, but he didn't believe that was possible for him. And so he made a conservative choice. Instead, he got a safe job as an accountant. And when I was 12 years old, he was let go from that safe job. And our family had to do whatever we could to survive. I learned many great lessons from my father, not the least of which was that you can fail at what you don't want. So you might as well take a chance on doing what you love.
And it's so good. You're he failed to be an accountant. He might as well have failed trying to be a comedian, right?
Yeah.
And, we're kind of derailed here, but I think it's important that we kind of have that discussion with young people, because it's there's so much hitting us as we're 18, 19 going into that. But I did like how you said you did a lot of volunteering. I'm a big fan of doing extracurriculum, internships, volunteering, building up your resume, building your experience and the connections in our industry, because once you graduate, you can kind of go, bang, I've got these connections and leverage that.
Absolutely. I think wiggling yourself into opportunities through volunteering, either in the social impact space or in the for-profit space, is such a good way of getting experience, because, if you can pitch it right, say, time-bound it, say, I'll do this for this long, I can offer you this, I'd love to learn this. There's very few people who will actually say no to that. If you demonstrate that you can learn quickly and won't get in their way, I would say. But I think a lot of my social impact volunteering taught me so much about organizations, because having never worked for a bigger organization, getting to volunteer in one gave me an understanding that I couldn't do the work I do today without. So I was very lucky to have that.
Yeah, and it's kind of, as you mentioned, if you pitch it right, you can kind of get in anywhere. If you want to work for someone, if you're willing to work for free and be a coffee bitch or whatever you have to do, right? Yeah. I know heaps of people who did that.
100%.
Call it a tea bitch. You just go around just getting people tea, sweeping the floors. If you want to, you don't have to be a lawyer. You can go in and just sweep the floors, and you can learn and see what the lifestyle's like. Same with any industry, really. And that's such a great way to do it, is volunteering.
Yeah. And
so I think it's really great that you're doing that, and that's a great strategy for people who are in university or young, not sure what they want to do. Volunteer, start meeting people.
Yeah. And I think it's just that willingness to roll up your sleeves. I had this conversation with my sister a few days ago, which was one of the reasons that I'm so not concerned by failure as much as many other people are, is because I have no qualms. If I bomb out hard, I'll go work in a cafe for a few months, regroup and rebuild. I have no resistance to doing some hard work, going back to basics, square one, and I'd rather do that, but know that I always followed what I thought was best than do what I've previously done, which is, I should do this. I should go
also,
this way.
You've got the resume now. You could probably land a job pretty easily. You've got that experience and stuff. So it's if you really look logically, it's like, let's say the worst case scenario, the whole thing collapses and I have to move home. So I move home for a few months, I get a job, I build up my savings, and I'm back into where I want to be. Like, it's not the end of the world. And that's the beauty we have as young people, because we don't have children, we don't have a mortgage, we don't have all these different things.
I do.
Yeah, you've got a mortgage? Yeah. But you don't have a lot of other responsibilities other people have. Especially the people listening to this probably don't have a mortgage.
Oh, exactly.
And so that's why it's like such a great time to take those risks and really pursue what you want to.
Oh, exactly. And I think I catastrophize at times. And the thing that I always like, the game that I like to play is, okay, what is the worst outcome here? What is the worst possible outcome? Can I survive that? Can I come up with a solution to that? Yes. Great. And then all of a sudden the world seems much less frightening. One of the activities that I actually think shaped my professional capabilities the most was when I was 19 or 20. I did a personal development course which told you to do the 100 no's challenge. So you write no on a piece of paper 100 times, and it gamifies rejection. So your job is to get 100 no's. So ask for things that are so audacious, try things that you're so convinced people will say no to, and then you get the reward function when you get a no, because you're trying to cross off all your no's on the sheet. And I still get that feedback today. You know, the wonderful co-lead that I got to run this consultation with, her name's Bianca, and she says, wow, you're just really comfortable shooting your shot and asking people for things or seeing if something's possible, and it's 100% because of that activity.
It's because we're grown up, especially my generation, in the younger generations, we're grown up with yes for everything. Like, we kind of always get what we want, and as soon as we get like a no, it's like, oh my god. Because people avoid confrontation. They do it over text message. They won't say no, they'll just be like, oh yeah, maybe we'll come back to that. And so they haven't actually said no, you know what I mean? And so I've actually heard like pickup artists, when they're like getting guys, they do the same thing. It's like, I want you to go out and get rejected. Obviously don't be a dickhead, but go out and ask out a girl, and you want to get rejected. And if she says, oh no thanks or something, you leave and you go, yes, I got that. It's the same thing. It's just training you to get used to rejection. That's why having door-to-door salesman on your resume is such a really powerful thing to a lot of employers. Because if you're someone who's done door-to-door sales, you know they're really tough, and you know they've gone through that process of being rejected, because that's a really brutal industry to be in.
I can only imagine. But yeah, that would be, I've never thought of it that way, but that would be phenomenal training for that. And I think that serves you anywhere in your life, because
100%.
Whether it's in your personal relationships, professional capacity, or how you interact with strangers on the street, if you're more comfortable asserting your boundaries, your curiosity, your questions, it's always going to take you further.
100%. Like, that's what you want as an employer. If you're looking for someone who's got that emotional intelligence, got that, that thickness to them, because I've gone through processes of sales or whatever it is, like the no's that you mentioned, that's a great exercise to do. Try to get 100 no's.
Oh, it's so good. And I think also it keeps you self-aware and keeps your ego in check. I think especially in entrepreneurship, there's a bit of a culture of egoism and the hustle. It's died down a little bit. I had a real bone to pick with it when it was very popular, but I think that it can keep you grounded and say, you know what, I don't deserve yeses all the time. And the no's, especially when they're people asserting their boundaries or their bandwidth limitations. Like, I've had good friends of mine that I asked for help with this campaign who couldn't do it, but said, you know what, my bandwidth is stretched, I can't do it. And I was like, yes, I love that you have boundaries. Like, I'm not hurt by that, because you need to say no with what you can manage, because overwork is something that I struggle deeply with. And so when I see people protecting themselves from it, I love that. I'm
exactly the same. Like, I've a bone to pick with the whole personal development as well. And look, I do agree. I think it has died down. I don't know if it's just because I've matured up with it. And so I'm like, I can't tell if maybe I've just matured with it or if the whole thing's died down. But there was a big period where it was like the hustle. And I think it still exists. 100% it still exists. Yeah. And I pushed it on the podcast. It's like, yeah, I do agree with the hustle, like work hard, but not to the detriment of your mental health or not to the detriment of your relationship with other people. You can still achieve a lot without having to work, 15 hours a day or whatever they say it is.
Yeah. I need to get better at that. I wish I could come from yes, I used to be that way and now I don't do that anymore. It's still a learning journey for me, but I definitely got wrapped up in the whole Gary V, hustle, the grind, like you only need 6 hours of sleep a day. No, I need 7.5. Yeah. If I don't have 7.5, I don't work very well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like, I have a thing called 5:30 Club, which is like...
I have friends who do that, yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah. So we started that. We've got about 25 clubs around Australia now.
Oh, wait. Oh, yeah.
So we have it's a company, and so we have, you just meet at a cafe at 5:30 every morning. And so we've got 25 cafes. We don't own the cafes, we just have clubs at those cafes. And so your friends might be a part of it. I'm not too sure.
The Bondi one.
Oh, Bondi. Who do you know?
Mandy.
Yeah, Mandy.
Mandy goes sometimes, and then Lucy. What's her name? It escapes me.
I know Lucy, and I think I got Mandy to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bondi's a really big one.
Yeah.
So where was I going with this?
That you do that because there is a value to the hustle.
Oh yeah, we were talking about the sleep.
Yes.
Because we actually had a lot of media early in the year, and Sydney Morning Herald did a massive post. In fact, everyone on their iPhone got a notification about it pop up. So it was really big. And the title was Sacrificing Sleep to Do Something. And we were like, gutted, because it was like, that's not what we're about at all. Because with 5:30 Club, it's like, yeah, you're getting up really early. The caveat is you just go to sleep earlier. Yeah. You get up 2 hours earlier, go to sleep 2 hours earlier. We're still big advocate of, 7.5 hours sleep. If I go to bed at 9 o'clock, I still get the same amount of sleep as everyone else. Yeah. And so people always think, oh, how do you do that? It's really hard. It's like, no, you don't have to sacrifice your sleep. And that's really not what we're about. We're not about that hustle. Because that is, I've kind of done a whole episode on it because I'm quite passionate about finding that balance of, yes, working hard, but then not too hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think it's also funny because if you read into, and I'm not a scientist by any means, but read into our sleep patterns, like we're meant to align more with the movements of the sun.
Yeah.
And that has you far more, at least in summer, far more aligned with that, I would imagine.
Yeah, what, circadian rhythms or something?
Something
like that. I think I got the word
I
wrong.
Trust you. I don't.
Yeah. But we have a few people who in the 5:30 Club who talk about that. It's where you just wake up when the sun gets up.
Yeah.
So right now, 5:30 is a little bit early. It starts rising about 6. But yeah, that's how, human history, that's how we did wake up. You go to bed when it was late and dark, and you'd wake up when it was light. Yeah. And so that's kind of, I guess, what you're talking about in terms of the science behind it.
What prompted you to want to start that?
5:30 Club?
Yeah.
I was just told about it, and it was a great way to meet people. Yeah. And I met people, and now I've just been going ever since.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just community, great community, like amazing people there. It's consistent every morning, or Monday to Friday. I'm there every morning, Monday to Friday. I couldn't do that if there wasn't people there waiting for me, and I didn't have to be somewhere. If I just had to wake up for myself. And that's where accountability is so important. It's like, I was actually talking with my mate before. I feel like I'm interested to get your opinions on it. We're so focused on doing things on our own. Like we want to be the one who did it all. We want to do it by ourselves. If you look at like all the superheroes, like Iron Man built his suit by himself. He hit it from people while he was building it, and Batman all solo. All these like really, I guess for me, masculine figures that young boys look up to have all done it on their own. And that's how, so as a part of me, I was like, I have to do it on my own. But no, it's so much easier when you do it with people. If you can remove your ego and let people come and help you, life is so much easier.
100%, and it's something that I've been speaking about a lot with this project, which is that there are so many organizations trying to do exactly what we're doing. This concept of trying to amplify the voice of youth or support young people is not new, and everyone needs to stop trying to be the one person who saves the world, because it simply doesn't work. Like, everything is too far gone at this point that one person can solve it. Can we solve it together? Absolutely. And so I think we just need to get over that superhero complex, exactly as you said it. And I think accountability, yes, is beneficial, but also just community and enjoying life. While yes, we want to try and make an impact, you want to try and be successful, whatever that means to you, but we need to make sure that we're doing that in a way that's actually still living.
Yeah, and that is a good point. Like, success is completely subjective.
Wildly so.
It's like whatever success is to you. And I think it's important people understand that. Like, success, it could be lots of money and whatever we perceive as it, but it could just be you've got a great family and you've got a full-time job and you love your family and you love working or whatever.
Oh, exactly.
Whatever it is.
And it's so dictated by what you did or didn't have growing up. I feel you often try and fill those gaps, and so it's so different for everyone. Yeah,
if you didn't have money, you're going to chase money. If you didn't have love and connection, you're going to chase love and connection, or whatever it is. But did you want to explain to us a little bit more about this project that you're working on, or you have been working on, in terms of amplifying youth's voice? Because I'd love to hear a little bit more about it.
Awesome. Yeah, trust me, I would love to ramble about it for a very long time. So, look, it came as a product of me just speaking to so many people in my life who care so much, who are anxious and a bit afraid, frankly, of what our future is going to be like from a climate perspective, a jobs perspective, inclusion, racism, sexism, like all of these very prevalent challenges. But then realizing that there's this sort of state of paralysis, and then also this sort of elite and exclusive group of young people who get to be on the youth advisory committees and get to be over here and have their voice heard. But there's actually very few consistent and stable ways for young people en masse to feel heard. And so we went about trying to design a way to do that. We did that in collaboration with the Global Shapers community, which is a youth leadership community of the World Economic Forum, as well as being supported by OS Super, which we're very grateful for. And it's meant that we have, as of today, 5,000 young people who have shared their perspectives on climate change, community inclusion, and responsible business. And over the next 2 weeks, if borders don't shut, I'm now going to interview a selection of about 15 leaders from all different sectors on their responses to these young people. And then bringing that all together, we'll publish our report in June with the hope to then, in partnership with the many other amazing organizations that we have come across along the way, because I'm a firm believer in partnership and collaboration, try and action these recommendations for the changes we want to see and find ways for young people to, with that consistency, have their voice heard. Because I think social media, for the majority of young people, gives us a bit of this false concept that we're heard. I think you post things on social media, you write your captions, and
it's like the whole Black Lives Matter, right? Sharing it to your story. Like everyone was sharing it to their stories, and it was like a massive awareness, but like, I don't know what actually happened off the back of it. Yeah,
exactly. And where is that going, and what and are you in an echo chamber? Because I promise you the algorithm knows that I'm a highly progressive, left-leaning individual, and so they're telling me all the things that they know are gonna make me upset or are gonna make me happy.
Yeah, this is a great point. Who was saying this? Was it, I think it was one of my most recent episodes, we were talking about it's like, yeah, the algorithms are so specific. You're going to think everyone else is seeing this stuff. So you think there's so much awareness going on. No. That's just your algorithm. No. All these guys are probably seeing lots of pretty girls on their algorithm, or all the Trump supporters are seeing all Trump stuff, or they're seeing all this stuff, and so whatever you're interested in is what you're going to see. So you don't be caught up that you might be in an echo chamber, and not the rest of the world isn't seeing what you're seeing.
Yeah, I have. So there's a few activities that I try and do sort of once a week, once every 2 weeks, so that I don't get stuck in a bubble. And one of them is I like to reverse Google. So whatever I'm percolating on at the time. So whether it is that I won't be contentious enough to list them, but whether it's to do with what's going on in Parliament, whether it's to do with what the presidency of the United States, etc. Googling the opposite of my opinion and trying to find articles that are arguing against what the algorithm has determined, I believe, which is often shockingly accurate. And it's really helpful, even if only to increase your empathy for the people who do believe that, because you can then understand the arguments that they have. I certainly don't agree with them, but I now understand their logic path more.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good sign of intelligence. Like, an intelligent person should be able to really put themselves in the shoes of who they're, arguing against. My friend does a game. She has a bunch of students at school, and she does like public speaking, and she does a game called Devil's Advocate, where they'll bring up a point and she'll argue whatever that point is, the opposite. And they just to get that exactly same thing as you, reverse Googling, just to get a different opinion and really get that thinking. Because you get caught up in your own bubble and you go, how can they be like this? How can they be like this? Have you read How to Win Friends and Influence People?
A long time ago, but yes.
That's my all-time favorite book in the personal development space. He does the same. There's a great story of President Lincoln during the war, when Lincoln had, one of the commanders, Lee, they had his commander Lee. They could capture him, and this would have ended the war because the river had risen and they couldn't escape. And he sent him a letter saying, "Go capture him now." But the commander didn't, and then the river went down and Lee escaped. And he wrote this big letter saying, "You've cost us the war. You've cost us a lot of men's lives, all this stuff." And the funny thing is that that letter was never sent. They found it in his drawer. And they suspect he wrote that, then went no. And he sent him a completely different letter saying, okay, well, let's see. He's just been in battle for 3 months. He's probably feeling tired, beaten up. He didn't want to attack him. He didn't want to lose his men. And he put himself into those shoes to see what they were like. And it's like, that is a sign of an intelligent person, in my opinion.
I couldn't agree more, and it's a conversation my partner and I have often, which is empathy isn't a zero-sum game. Just because you can understand how someone got to the decision that they got to doesn't mean that detracts at all from your experience. Like, for example, with Trump supporters, how disenfranchised do you have to feel, and does your experience have to be for you to think that approach is the best way out of that? Your experience clearly is not an enjoyable one. And so, yes, clearly there's systemic challenges that need to be resolved there that created that appetite. But, one would hope that there's other solutions to it.
Well, exactly, yeah. And so that's where you can just kind of keep going. But I do like that whole concept.
It's an interesting challenge though, because I think it sounds like your brain works a similar way to mine. The flip side of that is that sometimes I do find it hard to have the decisive black and white stance that I think people often want from, people in leadership positions, etc. Because I'm like, I can see it from both ways. I can be decisive at the end of the day when a decision needs to be made, but I do find it challenging to sort of indict people for their actions at times, because you can often see, even if you don't agree with it, how they got there. Is that something that you experience?
Yeah, 100%. I definitely struggle with that. This is a silly example, but in Avengers Infinity War, have you seen that movie?
I think so. Is that the one where they all
come together, and they get snapped away. So Thanos, I actually kind of sympathize with him because of his point of view. He's a main character. They really build him out and the whole point of the movie is his species died. He's the last of his species because it got overpopulated and they had poverty, famine, and then he's the last one who survived, and he watched his whole species die. And so he wants to kill half the universe because he knows by killing half the universe, the other half will thrive. So his intentions are really good, which is why I love it. Because I love when a villain isn't just, I want to blow up the world, and they actually have a genuine intention. And so I love his character in that. It's so phenomenal because I can kind of relate to, his point of view.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think I vaguely recall watching the movie and being like, I see a somewhat valid point there. I don't agree with your methods, but I see where you're coming from.
But he even says, he's just like, that by being able to snap it, we will remove half the universe, the rich, the poor, there's no advantage. There's no one gets if you look at COVID, for example, if the richer you are, the less likely you are to get COVID because you can stay away from it. Whereas this is just half the universe dies. So it's almost the most fair way of doing it. And you can see I get quite passionate because it's I can totally understand his point of view. And that's what I do when I see people. I'm like, try put myself in their point of view. And I'm not always good at it. Sometimes I catch myself always going from my point of view and going, hold on, what about, what do they have to say? Why are they saying this? It must be a good reason.
But it would probably be what makes you such a good interviewer, is that you can appreciate and see what people are motivated by and why they do things and why they're driven. So
yeah, I try. But you're going back to this whole project. So you're going to write a report and it's going to be around what are the issues you're really targeting. You mentioned climate change, racism, sexism. What are the key things?
So there was the original plan and there's where we're going now.
Yeah.
Original plan was, so it was co-designed with Global Shapers and sort of the Davos Lab, which is this global initiative. And so that was focused on climate change, community inclusion, and responsible business. What has really come through is by a landslide climate change. There was an element of the consultation that allowed young people to submit their question for an Australian leader. We got 3,500 questions, which I was having a look through this morning, so we've got to pick the ones that we'll pose to the leaders we're interviewing. And a lot of the questions are just, why address climate change?
Yeah.
Why don't you care? Why don't you take it seriously? I would estimate, and we're doing the analysis over the weekend, but I'd estimate probably 60% of the questions are climate change related, which is overwhelming.
Wow.
Which you can see that there's a little bit of impact that it would have had that it was framed as a climate change survey. So keep that in context. But the other things coming through that we sort of have a responsibility to weave in for sure would be obviously what's been happening in Parliament, some of the gendered challenges that we're facing. Racism was a huge thing that came through really strongly in all areas of the survey, as well as, I think First Nations reconciliation is a really important conversation for us to have. It's obviously linked to our challenges with racism in this country. And
do you mean because I feel like Australia does have kind of casual racism, or do you mean more at a surface level? What sort of racism?
I think it's a layered onion.
Yeah, that's what I think as well.
I think that there is a incredibly colonial lens that we bring to everything that we do.
Yes.
And so I think that puts this tinge on all layers of, how we develop policy, how we look at approaching reconciliation and the speed at which we've done it. The Statement of the Heart, I can't remember how many years ago that was now, but there's been a significant elapse of time and we haven't made a huge amount of progress on that front. But I also think, there's an incredible book by an author called Tyson Kunkaporta called Sand Talk, and he's actually one of our responding leaders, which is how Indigenous knowledge can save the world and combat climate change. There've been these populations who have been taking care of this land for long, long time before we were ever here. Why is it that we're not listening to that? And this is the time where we need it the most. So back to your point, we need to have enough humility and be able to check our ego to say, hey, you know more about this than we do. You have this connection to land. Let's have enough respect for that to have a peer-to-peer collaboration on how we address this.
I think the amount of ego in Parliament is unbelievable. And you can just see it through the news. And it doesn't surprise me climate change was a big one, because I feel like out of all those problems, it's how do we fix racism? How do we fix sexism? It's not as black and white. It's kind of a difficult thing to fix. But climate change is pretty black and white. It's like we need to get rid of fossil fuels.
World on fire.
Yeah, it's like we kind of know what we need to do. Obviously, I know there's a lot more economics in terms of if we get rid of coal, then we lose a lot of money coming into the economy, blah, blah, blah. But I believe, Australia should be number one in the world for solar energy. We have so much sun in Australia and so much space to put the solar panels. We should be number one in the world for solar energy.
And look, I won't pretend I'm not disappointed by our sort of Australian policy on climate change. I think that goes without saying for anyone who is pro-ambitious action. But I also think it's an incredibly intersectional topic. I think that our injustice and inequality is inextricably linked with climate on an intergenerational level. So young people will suffer more, as well as, the same as COVID. As, if you think about the Pacific Islands, for example, as water levels rise, as the world starts to change, it's not going to be the urban, comfortable people who suffer the most. It's going to be people in disadvantaged positions.
It always is.
Who will suffer from that. And so I think that we need to bring a lens of equity, not even just equality, but equity to how we handle this. And I think the other point that's worth raising, I do agree there's a lot of ego in Parliament, but how else do you be a politician without thinking that people should listen to you to that degree? It's sort of a necessary part.
Oh, for sure. And something, I'm doing a lot of presenting now, and it's you need to have some sort of ego to be a presenter, because you need to be up on stage thinking people can listen to you. Yeah. But it's making sure it's checked, right? Keep it in check. Even the same with the podcast, I'm always trying to keep that in check. And it's don't let your ego get ahead of you. And for me, I can justify it because I speak to young people. If I was on stage in front of adults, my God, my ego is not big enough to think that I could be unafraid in stage teaching adults, unless it was very specific things that I know I'm good at. But majority of everything else, no way. The reason I teach money and finance to young people is because I can teach it at the most surface level. We talk about 10% savings. I don't go into negative gearing and how to, do all this fancy stuff that someone with a finance degree could teach. I just teach real simple stuff. And so, it is a big part. And I think you're right. You do need to have some level of ego in terms of to think people need to listen to you, especially in an entire country. Yeah.
But I think the basic financial literacy is such a huge gap in Australia and in young people.
I think I've done 6 episodes I've done a lot of episodes on finance because it's such a big... It's probably the number one thing. Yeah. I haven't done literal surveys, but I've surveyed a lot of people. I've asked hundreds of people. The number one thing most people say is... when I say, what do you wish you learned at school, is finance. How do I pay off loans? How do taxes work? All that sort of stuff. Yeah. The
fact that you leave high school with not even... Well, I didn't leave high school with a basic understanding of how tax worked is wild.
Yeah.
And it's one of the few things guaranteed in life is tax.
Exactly. There's a few things, I talk about, relationships, nutrition, and finance are 3 things. It does not matter what career you go into, you need to have good understanding of those. And I would argue communication skills as well. Unless you're sitting coding all day, sure, you probably don't need the best communication skills.
But is that good for your brain if you're just looking at a computer screen all day?
But communication skills in 95% of jobs are very important, especially even just to get the job. You need good communication skills. So there's a lot of fundamental stuff. I'm why aren't we learning this? But we're learning, a lot of advanced math and biology or chemistry, which I'm never going to use and most people are never going to use. But I talk about this a lot. It's kind of what this podcast is about. I'm kind of becoming known as the guy who doesn't like school or whatever, which is not what it's the system, the school system. But it blows my mind because often people will be like, okay, well, what's your solution? It's my solution is go look at all these other countries that are doing amazing things, like Finland, even Russia. I've had a look at their education systems. I've read a whole bunch of books on them. They are doing incredible jobs, so we could just copy and mimic. Yep. Out of the 52 developed countries in the world, we're 47 in education.
I did not know that. That's upsetting. Because our education system serves one purpose, which is to create the type of employees that we needed X amount of years ago. It's no longer relevant. And it also serves one type of intelligence. And it's funny because I did quite well at school because I am just lucky enough to sit within that stream of the type of intelligence that it responds well to. But I have friends who are far more intelligent than me who did not respond well to school at all, didn't finish high school, but I consider them far smarter than I am now that I've seen how they perform in life and the different capabilities they have, across their EQ, their artistic capabilities, all this other
creativity, emotional intelligence, all that stuff, right?
And that's the stuff at the end of the day that matters. I promise you, my ability to analyze a text from the Cold War has not served me that well, but my ability to have EQ and and, make people feel comfortable and that they can share with me has served me far better than that ability in life.
And do you know what the problem is? And I've mentioned this a few times. People like you who do fit within the system in terms of that way of learning, you probably thought you were really intelligent, and then it's a wake-up call when you enter the real world. And you go, oh my God, am I not in the top 1%? Like, all these other people are doing amazing. And a lot of people, from what I've heard, this is just from what I see, who are really smart at school, they'll enter the real world, and when they're not immediately good at something like they were in school, they think they're not good at it and they'll give up. When it's like, well, no, you have to just keep trying at it.
Exactly. And you win in no way with that. Either you end up like me, you work your butt off, you get that silly little number that matters for about 2 months, and then no one ever asks you about it again. And I wish people did.
Yeah.
I used to tutor for quite a few years after I finished high school, and when the students would be having their panics about, oh, what if I don't get this ATAR, or what if I don't do well, I said, I did do well, and no one even cared.
Yeah.
It didn't matter. I wish it mattered more, but it doesn't. And then if you don't do well, I have incredible friends of mine who didn't do well, who spent the next 3 to 4 years trying to recover from that experience. And they, the cost that that's had to how much they've put themselves out in the world, even in relationships, is huge. And so, I would be fully on board with an overhaul of the education system.
Yeah, I just think, and even it's crazy. I just interviewed a 19-year-old girl. She's kind of hit the peak of her career at 19. So she runs a breakfast show for Ben Fordham, which is a #1 breakfast show in Sydney. So she kind of runs that whole show, and she's 19, right? Because she left school at 15 and got a job in radio and just kind of built her way up.
Good on her.
And she went. It's so interesting. She was at university before her friends even graduated high school. So she didn't even have an ATAR and she's at university. Yet her friends were going, oh my God, wait, I'm studying my ass off to get an ATAR to get into a similar degree as you. Yet you're already in a degree and you dropped out of high school. Because that's not how it works. People don't get it. You can get into degrees in multiple different ways in Australia specifically. Obviously, yes, getting a high ATAR will help. But I know people who got a 55 ATAR and now they're doctors.
Yeah.
People they shouldn't be wrapping up their identity in this number.
100%. And rules are made to be broken. I started my MBA earlier this year, beginning of last year, or end of last year. And I think you're meant to have 10 years working experience to start it, which evidently I don't. And I just wrote this impassioned long letter about why it shouldn't matter. And I said, I've been working and in tandem doing volunteer work, and I started my first business when I was this old. So if you do the math in a funny way, it's kind of 10 years. And they approved it. So I think it's just a matter of the system is the way that it is. And obviously we hope that it changes over time. But my theory is navigate the landscape that you have while pushing for the one that you want. So don't just necessarily let the rules put you where they think you should go, because the likely chance is that those rules aren't designed for you. Especially
in 2020. I can't imagine anything worse than jumping into a degree because you feel like you have to, doing that degree, then finding out that it's useless because technology's changed or whatever it is. I know there's a lot less spots for being a lawyer because a lot of the internship roles have been replaced by robots and computers. Yeah. A lot of the easy tasks are just on automation because of computers and stuff. So that is something to look into. We should be learning skills that can't be replaced by computers, like communication skills, creativity, emotional intelligence, critical thinking, versus memorizing dates in a textbook. A computer can do that. Google has that. Yeah. We're never not going to have Google on us.
We need our deeply human capabilities to be the things that we focus on. Because even when I started my law degree in 2012, which was sort of before as much of that had happened, they were already telling us there's not enough jobs for everyone in this cohort.
Wow.
So if you're not acing this course, you need to think about what else you want to be doing.
Yeah.
Because there are way too many law graduates. Because too many people like me are I don't know what to do.
Australia has way too many law graduates.
Oh, yes.
I'm not sure why specifically Australia. I don't know if it's a worldwide thing, but in Australia, I saw a statistic and it's I don't know what it was. It was just basically saying we have way too many lawyers.
Yeah. Why? Yeah, I don't know what sort of caused that initial flywheel. I do think it's likely because those sort of traditional pathways for people like myself who aren't numerically inclined aren't as many. But yeah, I don't know how that happened.
It is. I think it's a lot of status chasing.
Entirely. Because when I think about the visual that I had in my head the reasons that I decided it was make parents happy, wear cool suits, strut around, be fancy, tell people what to do.
Nice watch, nice car. People will look up to me.
Yeah, I'll be fancy.
Yeah.
Which is not how you should ever make decisions, ever.
Yeah. Don't get caught in the status trap. That's a lot of society pushes us to a status trap where we're chasing something because we want to be high status or we want to raise our status.
Yeah.
I mean, even entrepreneurs, putting entrepreneur in your bio, right, makes you feel good, makes you raise your status. It's in that, we're seeing a lot of that where everyone's, wanting to be entrepreneurs now, which is great, but understand it is a grind. It's not that easy.
100%. And I remember one of the most vivid memories that I have in life is I sort of wrote this list of 10 things that I wanted to achieve before I was 30. And one of them was get a 30 under 30 list thing. And I was in Melbourne on a work trip and I got an email from someone notifying me that I'd been put on one of those lists. I saw the email, I was happy for about a half second, and then I burst into tears because as soon as the second was over, I was like, okay, what's the next thing I've got to achieve? What's the next thing that matters or will make people think that I'm doing well? I sat on a bench outside Maya in Burke Street Mall in Melbourne and just cried for about 15 minutes because...
So I have a lot to say about that because I talk about this a lot. Yeah. That's a scientific word for that, hedonistic adaptation. It's when, exactly that, it's when as humans, when we achieve something, we're happy for a few seconds, then we go, what's next?
Yeah.
I honestly believe at Empower You, this personal development event for teenagers that I'm kind of presenting at and helping run, we teach one of the pillars, and spoiler here, it's called Dream, Struggle, Prize. Everyone has a dream, but in order to get to the prize, you need to have the struggle. And so I believe if you can learn to enjoy the struggle or the journey, if you can learn to enjoy the struggle, learn to enjoy the journey, you're going to have a much more fulfilling life. Because chances are when you get the prize, you're not actually going to be fulfilled and satisfied. You're just going to go, what's next? What's next? And you're just continually going to be chasing. So if you can learn to enjoy the journey and and not so much a destination, but the struggle and the journey, that's where you can really have a more fulfilling life, in my opinion.
100% agree. I feel like for the sake of interest, I should disagree with you on a few things, but I think we're just very aligned with the way we view the world. But I think if you're constantly waiting for the hard things to be over, your life will pass you by and it'll be over before you know it. Like, life is challenging. And that's not negative. That's just part of the beautiful, complex thing that we have here.
Yeah.
And, like for me, I have, chronic pain, injuries and whatnot. And, if I was like, okay, I'll enjoy life once they're gone, or I'll enjoy life when work's not so busy or this or that, you're just going to waste your whole life away.
Yeah. And that's a classic one. I'll start a business when I'm not as busy. When are you ever not going to be busy?
Yeah.
Like, there's never a right time to start it.
No, exactly. And I think, or if you're like me, you become a little less busy, something opens up and then you shove something in there straight away.
You just fill it up.
I need to resist doing.
Yeah, totally. But anyway, this has been a really cool conversation. I think we went down some really interesting rabbit holes. Before we wrap up, I just want to ask one final question, and that is, what would your number one piece of advice be to the younger generation? It can be absolutely anything.
It would be to take the time to actually understand what you want and why you want that, and sort of interrogate that. Otherwise, you can end up making decisions because you want to be validated by someone else, because you want to please someone else, because you're taking this traditional path. And it does take time to actually work out, what do I want and why do I want it? Because that will also affect how you run your relationships, what you choose to do with your life. And I think investing the time and having the patience to think through that, I wish I'd done that younger, and it's revolutionized the way I choose to live my life. So that would be my biggest suggestion. Amazing.
And I did want to say just to my TikTok followers, because I get grilled. I get continuing questions about like, what ATAR did you get? Whenever I talk about the education system, they go, oh, he's just salty, you didn't get a high ATAR or something. I have had so many people like you with really high ATARs who agree with me. And so it's nice to have people like you who were really good at school, really, naturally talented at school, got a high mark, but can still see, okay, it's actually not the best system.
Oh, yeah.
So it's nice for me to have that, because it's like, I'm not just hating on the system.
Oh, yeah. To anyone who disagrees with you, the system was great to me. The system gave me everything I wanted, and I still think that it's broken because it still left me thinking that life was easy, which it's not. And it left people who fell anywhere else on the spectrum either thinking that they're not good enough or XYZ. I think no one wins.
Yeah, no one wins. I agree. But anyway, Taylor, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, get involved with this kind of survey or anything that's going on, where's the best place to connect or go to?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find Foundations for Tomorrow on Instagram at Foundations for Tomorrow, and you can find me on Instagram at Taylor D. Hawkins.
Yep, and all the links will be in the show notes below. But otherwise, Taylor, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Thank you so much for listening to this entire episode of the podcast. The fact that you would sit there and listen to me for so long is awesome, and I love you for that. Thank you so much. Just real quick, I am starting to speak at schools a lot more frequently now. So if you're in Australia, specifically Sydney, and either you're a student, maybe you're a teacher, or you've got a brother or sister in school, or you have any connections at all and you want me to come speak at a school or any presenting things, I am looking to ramp that up a lot. I've got a really cool school talk I've been working on for a few months now. I've just started speaking at a bunch of schools. It's been going really well. So yeah, go to the link in the show notes or go to drivenyoung.com and you'll see school talks up the top, and just click on that and send me an email. Otherwise, yeah, figure out any way to get in contact with me. I've also got the Sexual Assault podcast, which is now live with Brent Sanders. Go check that out. It's called Consent and Consequences. That is a Driven Young Productions podcast. It's something I'm very proud of. So there's lots going on. Definitely go check it all out. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening to this entire episode, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and week.